The land had always been in my family. My father purchased these 15 acres back in 1978, long before developers saw potential in our quiet corner of Oak Ridge County. He built our modest house with his own 2 hands, pouring concrete for the foundation while I watched as a child. "This land is our legacy," he would tell me. "Take care of it, and it will take care of you." When he passed away 5 years ago, I became the sole guardian of that legacy. I lived a peaceful existence. My mornings began with coffee on the east-facing porch, watching the sun rise over the oak trees that had stood sentinel for generations. The old wooden fence that marked our property line had weathered many storms, but it remained sturdy, much like the values my father had instilled in me. I worked from home as a technical writer, appreciating the quiet that allowed me to concentrate. Everything changed when Sycamore Ridge Estates began construction in the adjacent property. At first, I paid little attention. Progress was inevitable, I supposed. The distant sound of construction equipment became the background noise to my days. I watched from afar as modern homes sprouted from empty fields, each one larger and more ostentatious than the last. Then came the day I noticed orange surveyor flags planted in a straight line through the northeast corner of my property. They appeared overnight, bright and intrusive against the natural landscape. My heart began to pound as I traced their path. According to these flags, nearly half an acre of my land had been reassigned without my knowledge or consent. The next morning, I approached a group of workers who had begun clearing that corner of my property. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to remain calm. "I believe there has been some mistake. This is my land you are working on." A foreman in a yellow hard hat barely looked up from his clipboard. "We are following the approved development plans. Take it up with Sycamore Ridge HOA if you have concerns." "But this is my property," I insisted, producing the deed from my folder of documents. "These boundaries have been established for decades." The man glanced at my papers with visible disinterest. "Look, buddy, we go by the plans they give us. This development has all the proper approvals. Now, if you will excuse us, we have got a schedule to keep." I immediately called the Sycamore Ridge HOA office. The receptionist, her voice sugary with practiced politeness, informed me that Mr. Holloway, the board president, was unavailable. She took my information and promised he would return my call. Days passed. No call came. After 5 increasingly frustrated messages, I finally received a response, not from Mr. Holloway but from Barbara Winston, the HOA vice president. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I can assure you that all property lines have been professionally surveyed and approved by the county. Perhaps your older documents are outdated." I drove to the county recorder's office that same afternoon. The clerk helped me locate the original surveys, which clearly showed the boundaries my father had established. But when I returned to my property the next day, construction had accelerated. Foundation forms were already being placed on my land. Desperate, I approached the workers again, this time with the county documents in hand. One of them actually laughed. "Take it up with management, old man. We are just doing our job." Within weeks, a magnificent 2-story colonial house rose from the ground, its eastern wing extending boldly onto what had always been my property. I watched helplessly as landscapers planted imported trees and rolled out pristine sod over soil where my father had once taught me to identify native plants. The day Dr. Elizabeth Langford moved in was the final insult. Moving trucks lined the newly paved driveway as workers carried in expensive furniture. She supervised everything with meticulous attention, directing each placement with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. When our eyes met across the boundary line that no longer existed, she offered a thin smile before deliberately turning away. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the illuminated windows of the mansion that now intruded onto my inheritance. The HOA had stolen my land in broad daylight, and they believed I would simply accept it. I spent the next week buried in paperwork. Every evening after work, I spread documents across my dining table, land surveys, property records, tax statements, anything that could prove what I already knew to be true. My father had been meticulous about documentation. Among his files, I found the original survey from when he purchased the property, yellowed but perfectly preserved in a plastic sleeve. Armed with this evidence, I contacted Samuel Matthews, a local surveyor with 30 years of experience. "I need an independent verification," I told him. "I need to know exactly where my property line falls." Samuel arrived early on Saturday morning, equipment in tow. I watched as he worked methodically, referring occasionally to the old surveys I had provided. By mid-afternoon, his conclusion was unequivocal. "According to these measurements," he said, pointing to his digital device, "approximately 32 feet of that new construction extends onto your property. No question about it." He shook his head. "Someone moved the boundary markers. This is serious business, Mr. Reynolds." Samuel provided me with official documentation of his findings. I felt vindicated but knew the real battle was just beginning. The next morning, I delivered copies of the survey to the Sycamore Ridge HOA office, requesting an emergency meeting with the board. The receptionist accepted the envelope with obvious reluctance. 3 days later, instead of a meeting invitation, I received a certified letter from Peterson and Associates, the HOA's legal representation. The language was formal but the message clear: cease and desist all harassment of the HOA and its members. They claimed my unfounded accusations were causing significant distress to the community. The letter concluded with a thinly veiled threat of legal action if I continued to spread misinformation. That weekend, Sycamore Ridge held their monthly community gathering. From my property, I could see residents assembling on the grand patio of Dr. Langford's home, the very patio that existed on my land. String lights twinkled as catering staff moved among guests carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. Laughter drifted through the evening air, punctuated occasionally by the distinct voice of Barbara Winston. "Elizabeth has been so generous letting us use her beautiful home," I overheard her announce to the gathering. "And to think, we almost let that eyesore next door hold up construction." More laughter, my hands clenched involuntarily. The following week brought new indignities. Neighbors who had previously been cordial now avoided eye contact when we crossed paths in town. I overheard whispers at the local hardware store. "That is him, the one causing problems for Sycamore Ridge." My reputation was being systematically dismantled. Dr. Langford installed security cameras that conveniently pointed toward my property. Every time I stepped onto my porch or worked in my yard, I felt their electronic gaze. My sanctuary had become a fishbowl. In desperation, I consulted Jennifer Patel, a real estate attorney known for taking on difficult cases. Her office was modest but immaculate, with diplomas and certificates covering one wall. She listened intently as I presented my evidence, occasionally making notes. "You have a strong case," she confirmed after reviewing the documents. "The property encroachment is clear, and the original boundary documentation is solid." She removed her glasses. "But I have to be honest with you, these cases can be expensive and time-consuming. The HOA has resources, and they have already begun building a narrative against you." "What do you mean?" I asked. "They are painting you as difficult, unstable, resistant to progress. They will claim you misunderstood the boundaries or that you altered the documents." She leaned forward. "Are you prepared for that kind of fight? Because once we file, they will come at you with everything they have." I thought about my father, about his hands calloused from building our home, about his voice telling me to protect what was ours. "I do not have a choice," I replied. "That land is my heritage." Jennifer nodded. "Then we prepare for war. I will draft the initial complaint. In the meantime, document everything, every interaction, every incident. We need to build our case methodically." As I left her office, My phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Dr. Langford herself, an invitation to her official housewarming gala the following weekend. The message included a personal note. "I do hope you can make it, Mr. Reynolds. It would be nice to finally meet the neighbor everyone is talking about." The audacity was breathtaking. She was inviting me to celebrate in a house partially built on my stolen land. 2 days after my meeting with Jennifer, I received another certified letter. This one contained an offer from the HOA, $5,000 in exchange for signing over the disputed portion of my property. The accompanying note suggested this was a generous solution to avoid unnecessary legal complications. $5,000 for land that had been in my family for nearly half a century, land that, according to current market values, was worth at least 10 times that amount. The insult was calculated, designed to demonstrate how little they valued both me and my claim. I refused the offer, naturally. Jennifer sent a formal rejection letter, reiterating our intention to pursue full restoration of my property rights. The HOA's response was swift and petty. The first citation arrived the next morning. My mailbox, the same one that had stood at the end of my driveway for 20 years, suddenly violated Section 4.7 of the Sycamore Ridge Aesthetic Guidelines. The fact that I was not a member of their association, and therefore not subject to their guidelines, seemed irrelevant to them. 3 days later, a second citation appeared. My yard contained excessive natural vegetation that constituted a visual disruption to the community aesthetic. The native wildflowers my father had cultivated, the ones that supported local pollinators, were now officially deemed unacceptable. The citations continued to accumulate. My fence needed painting. My trash cans were visible from the street. My porch light was too bright. Each violation carried a fine that I had no obligation to pay, but the psychological toll was becoming evident. This was harassment, plain and simple. One morning I discovered my mailbox had been vandalized overnight. The post was splintered, the box itself dented beyond repair. When I reported it to the local sheriff, he took photographs but appeared skeptical. "Probably just teenagers," he suggested with a shrug. "Not much we can do without witnesses." I installed a replacement mailbox that afternoon. The next day, I received a citation for installing an unapproved mailbox design. Jennifer advised patience. "Document everything," she reminded me. "Every citation, every incident, take photographs, make videos, start keeping a daily journal. These patterns of harassment will strengthen our case." I followed her advice meticulously. Each morning, I photographed my property from multiple angles to record any changes or damages that might occur during the day. I installed my own security cameras, positioned to cover my entire property line. I kept detailed notes of every interaction, every overheard comment, every new citation. Meanwhile, life in Sycamore Ridge continued with ostentatious normalcy. Weekend gatherings at Dr. Langford's home became regular events. Cars lined the street, their owners blithely trespassing across my property to reach her driveway. Music and conversation drifted over the disputed boundary line, each note a reminder of what had been taken from me. Then came the most audacious move yet, a formal invitation to Dr. Langford's welcome gala, delivered by a courier in a pressed uniform. The heavy cardstock envelope contained an embossed invitation requesting my presence at an evening of neighborhood fellowship. A handwritten note from Dr. Langford herself suggested this could be an opportunity to discuss our situation more amicably. I showed the invitation to Jennifer during our weekly update meeting. She raised an eyebrow. "They are trying to control the narrative," she observed. "If you attend, they will present it as evidence that you have accepted the situation. If you decline, they will claim you are being uncooperative." She was right, of course. It was manipulation disguised as olive branch. That evening, While reviewing some of my father's old correspondence, I made a discovery that changed everything. Among the faded letters was correspondence between my father and my late Uncle Robert regarding a private electrical substation on the northern edge of our property. Uncle Robert, an electrical engineer, had apparently secured energy distribution rights decades ago for a planned development that never materialized. The letters mentioned a 10-year renewable lease agreement with the county. If those rights had transferred to me after my uncle's passing, as his sole remaining heir. I contacted Jennifer immediately. "I need you to look into something," I explained. "It might be nothing, but if I am right, we may have leverage we never expected." "What kind of leverage?" she asked. "The kind that controls whether lights stay on or go out." The county utility office was housed in a nondescript building downtown, its interior a maze of fluorescent lighting and beige cubicles. I arrived when they opened, clutching a folder containing Uncle Robert's letters and my identification proving my relationship to him. Martha Simmons, a utility administrator with 30 years of service, helped me navigate the Byzantine record system. "These energy distribution agreements are complicated," she explained, scrolling through databases. "Especially private substations like the one you are describing." After 2 hours of searching, we found it, the original agreement, signed by Uncle Robert in 1992. The document detailed his purchase of infrastructure rights for a small electrical substation located on the northern portion of what was now my property. More importantly, we discovered that after his death, those rights had indeed transferred to me as part of his estate settlement. "This is interesting," Martha noted, reviewing the subsequent paperwork. "The developers of Sycamore Ridge negotiated access to this substation 5 years ago, but they never purchased the rights outright. They only secured a 10-year access agreement." My heart raced, and that agreement was with my uncle. Martha nodded. "According to this, they have been making annual payments to his estate, which would now be you. Did you never notice the deposits?" I had not. The payments had been relatively modest and were automatically directed to an account I rarely monitored. But the implications were enormous. The entire Sycamore Ridge development, including Dr. Langford's ill-placed mansion, depended on electricity flowing through infrastructure that I legally controlled. To verify my understanding, I consulted with Dennis Watkins, an energy infrastructure consultant recommended by Jennifer. We met at a coffee shop far from Sycamore Ridge to ensure privacy. "Based on these documents," Dennis confirmed after reviewing everything, "you absolutely have the legal right to renegotiate or even terminate their access to the substation when the current agreement period ends." He checked some dates, which happens to be in approximately 3 months. Jennifer was cautiously optimistic when I shared the news. "This gives us significant leverage," she acknowledged. "But we need to proceed carefully. I recommend creating a separate corporate entity to handle the negotiations. It provides a layer of protection and formality." Over the next several weeks, we quietly established Oak Ridge Energy Holdings, LLC, with me as the primary stakeholder. The corporate structure would allow me to negotiate from a position of strength without directly connecting the energy issue to our ongoing property dispute. Meanwhile, the harassment from Sycamore Ridge intensified. Anonymous complaints about noise led to visits from local authorities. Despite my quiet lifestyle, drones occasionally hovered over my property, ostensibly for community security purposes. Notes appeared in my mailbox suggesting I would be happier somewhere else. One morning, I discovered that someone had salted portions of my garden overnight. Dr. Langford became increasingly bold. She hosted an HOA board meeting on her back patio, the section extending onto my property. Through my security cameras, I could see them pointing in my direction, laughing. They believed they had won. They believed I had no recourse but to eventually surrender to their pressure. What they could not see was me sitting at my dining table, finalizing the paperwork that would allow Oak Ridge Energy Holdings to legally acquire control of the substation access agreement. What they could not know was that in 3 months' time, their lights, their air conditioning, their electronic gates and security systems, everything that made their perfect community function, would be subject to my discretion. "Are you certain about this?" Jennifer asked during our final review of the strategy. "Once we initiate this process, there is no turning back. They will know it was you." I thought about my father's words. I thought about the land that had been stolen, the dignity that had been trampled, the legacy that had been disrespected. "I am certain," I replied. "Let them learn what happens when they build their dreams on someone else's foundation." The official notification from Oak Ridge Energy Holdings, LLC arrived at the Sycamore Ridge HOA office on a Tuesday morning. The letter was professionally drafted, clinically precise in its language. This correspondence serves as official notice of termination of agreement SR 94578 regarding access to electrical substation facilities located on private property designated as Parcel 147A in Oak Ridge County. Termination effective immediately. From my home office window, I observed the aftermath. Barbara Winston emerged from the HOA building clutching the letter, her face contorted with confusion. She made several agitated phone calls before hurrying to her car. Within an hour, 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot. Men in expensive suits rushed inside. I did not have to wait long for the reaction. At precisely 2:17 that afternoon, Dr. Langford's silver Merced screeched to a halt in my driveway. She stormed toward my front door, designer heels sinking into the gravel. I opened the door before she could knock. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice shrill with panic. She thrust the termination letter toward me. "Is this some kind of sick revenge plot? Sabotage? Do you have any idea what this means?" I remained calm. "I believe it means that Sycamore Ridge has been accessing electrical infrastructure without securing permanent rights to do so. A rather significant oversight for such a meticulous community." "This is extortion," she sputtered. "The HOA will sue you for every penny you have." "For exercising my legal rights to property that has belonged to my family for generations?" I asked. "Interesting perspective, Dr. Langford, especially coming from someone currently standing in a house built partially on land that does not belong to her." Her face flushed crimson. "You cannot just cut off power to an entire community." "Actually, according to Section 5.3 of the access agreement your HOA signed, I can, with proper notification, which you have now received." That evening, as scheduled, the HOA held its monthly general meeting in their community center. I watched from my property as residents arrived in luxury vehicles, gathering to discuss landscaping requirements and community events, blissfully unaware of the impending situation. At precisely 7:30 p.m., as the meeting should have been called to order, darkness fell across Sycamore Ridge. Street lights extinguished. Windows went black. The distant hum of air conditioning units died. Security gates froze in their tracks. On my property, powerful floodlights, installed the previous day and connected to my independent generator, illuminated the night sky. The contrast could not have been more dramatic. My modest home blazing with light while their pristine development disappeared into darkness. Chaos erupted. Car headlights crisscrossed the community as residents emerged from the meeting. Voices raised in confusion and anger. Flashlight beams bounced erratically as people attempted to navigate suddenly unfamiliar territory. It took less than 20 minutes for the first HOA board members to appear at my door. Mr. Halloway, the president who had never returned my calls, stood flanked by 2 other board members. Their expressions ranged from fury to desperation. "This is completely unacceptable," Halloway began, attempting to maintain his authority despite the circumstances. "You have endangered our residents. There are elderly people, children. I believe endangerment would require negligence or malice, I interrupted. I have simply exercised legal rights to property that belongs to me, something your association should understand, given how vigorously you enforce your own property claims. What do you want? Barbara Winston asked bluntly. Money, is that it? What I want is respect for established boundaries, I replied. Return what was taken from me, compensate me fairly for the encroachment, and perhaps we can discuss restoration of services. Dr. Langford arrived as we were speaking, accompanied by 2 police officers. This is him, she announced dramatically. He has deliberately cut power to our community. That has to be criminal. The officers, looking uncomfortable, requested to see my documentation. I provided copies of everything: the energy rights, the termination notice, the property surveys showing the encroachment. After reviewing the papers, the senior officer turned to Dr. Langford. Ma'am, this appears to be a civil matter. Mr. Reynolds seems to be within his legal rights regarding the substation. As they departed into the darkness, I called after them. I would be happy to negotiate when you are ready to discuss legitimate property boundaries. By morning, portable generators hummed throughout Sycamore Ridge, providing minimal power to the most essential systems. The community's pristine appearance had deteriorated overnight. No landscape lighting illuminated their manicured shrubs, security gates stood permanently open, and residents emerged from homes with disheveled appearances, lacking their usual access to hot water and climate control. Jennifer arranged for the negotiation to take place on neutral ground, a conference room at the Oak Ridge County Administration Building. I arrived early, setting up a digital recorder with the county clerk's permission. Everything needs to be documented, Jennifer reminded me. No room for misinterpretation later. The HOA contingent arrived en masse. All 7 board members, their attorney, and Dr. Langford, who technically held no official position but had clearly inserted herself into the process. They filed in silently, their usual confidence notably diminished after 24 hours without reliable electricity. Jennifer opened the proceedings with clinical precision. We are here to resolve 2 interconnected matters: the unlawful encroachment on my client's property and the termination of the electrical substation access agreement. We have prepared a comprehensive proposal that addresses both issues. She distributed folders containing our terms: immediate acknowledgement of the property line encroachment, financial compensation for both the land value and emotional distress, redrawing of official community maps, and a new electrical access agreement with significantly increased fees. Howard Peterson, the HOA's attorney, skimmed the document with a deepening frown. These terms are excessive. My clients were acting in good faith based on surveys provided by the developer. Surveys that conveniently redrew boundaries established decades earlier, Jennifer countered. Boundaries that were visibly marked and documented with the county. Barbara Winston interjected. We could countersue for the deliberate disruption of essential services to hundreds of residents. You could, I acknowledged, speaking directly for the first time. But that litigation would take months, possibly years, during which time Sycamore Ridge would need to secure alternative energy sources at considerable expense, not to mention the negative publicity. Dr. Langford, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. This is not entirely the HOA's fault, she insisted. I purchased my home in good faith. The builder assured me all boundaries were properly established. Then perhaps your quarrel is with your builder, I suggested. However, that does not change the fact that approximately 32 feet of your home exists on land that belongs to me. Mr. Halloway cleared his throat. What if we offered to purchase the disputed land at market value? That would resolve the boundary issue cleanly. That might have been an acceptable solution months ago, before I was ignored, harassed, and mocked, I replied. The circumstances have changed. Jennifer projected photographs onto the wall screen, images of the vandalized mailbox, the salted garden, the security cameras pointed at my property. We have extensively documented a pattern of harassment that would be compelling in court. The negotiation continued for hours, with incremental concessions from both sides. By late afternoon, exhaustion had softened the HOA's resistance. They agreed to acknowledge the correct property boundaries, compensate me at 3 times market value for the encroached land, publicly apologize for the harassment, and sign a new 20-year electrical access agreement that would generate significant annual income for my newly formed company. Dr. Langford, upon realizing that a substantial portion of her home would need to be modified or demolished, attempted one final desperate maneuver. "This will destroy my property value," she exclaimed. "Property that was built on land you did not own," I reminded her calmly. As we finalized the agreement, a reporter from the Oak Ridge County Gazette appeared in the hallway outside. Word of our dispute had leaked to the local media. The HOA representatives exchanged alarmed glances, suddenly confronting the prospect of public scrutiny. The final settlement was signed by 5:30 that evening. By 6:15, power was restored to Sycamore Ridge. By the following morning, my story, "Local Homeowner Stands Against Developer Overreach," occupied the front page of the county newspaper. Spring arrived with remarkable vigor that year. Where bulldozers had once torn through the northeastern corner of my property, native wildflowers now stretched toward the sun. I had spent weeks restoring the damaged soil, adding compost, reintroducing indigenous plants that my father had taught me to identify as a child. Nature, resilient as always, began the healing process almost immediately. The construction crew arrived in early March to begin modifications to Dr. Langford's mansion. The eastern wing, the portion that had encroached onto my land, was systematically dismantled. I watched from my porch as workers carefully removed windows, architectural elements, and finally the framing itself. The process was surprisingly dignified, almost like watching surgery rather than demolition. Dr. Langford herself appeared only once during this process. She stood at the edge of her reduced property, arms crossed tightly across her chest, watching the deconstruction without expression. When she noticed me observing, she turned away quickly. 2 weeks later, a "for sale" sign appeared in her front yard. By midsummer, she had sold the house at a substantial loss and relocated to another county. The HOA underwent its own transformation. The settlement had required them to rewrite their bylaws, specifically adding provisions against harassment and boundary disputes. Several board members, including Barbara Winston, resigned their positions. The new leadership adopted a more reserved approach to community management, focusing on actual maintenance rather than aggressive enforcement. On the 1-year anniversary of our settlement, I installed a simple cedar post at the restored boundary line. Attached to it was a hand-carved wooden sign reading, "Reynolds Land, Est, 1978, My Land, My Legacy." It was not meant as provocation but as quiet affirmation, a reminder of principles worth defending. With part of the settlement money, I established the James Reynolds Community Land Trust, named for my father. The organization would help other landowners navigate disputes with developers and HOAs, providing resources and legal assistance when needed. It felt like the right way to honor his memory, extending the protection he had taught me to others facing similar challenges. Life gradually returned to its peaceful rhythm. My mornings once again began with coffee on the east-facing porch, though the view had changed somewhat. Where Dr. Langford's mansion had once intruded, native trees now cast dappled shadows across restored ground. Birds had returned to the area, their songs replacing the hum of surveillance cameras. On particularly clear evenings, I sometimes sat in the old wooden chair my father had built, contemplating the journey of the past year. The battle had changed me, hardened certain aspects of my character while softening others. I had discovered reserves of determination I never knew I possessed. One such evening, as twilight settled over the property, I noticed a young family walking along the Sycamore Ridge side of the boundary. They paused near my sign, the father pointing toward my modest home before continuing their stroll. Something about their manner suggested respect rather than curiosity or disdain. I recalled one of the last conversations I had with my father before his passing. We had been walking this very property line, checking fence posts that needed repair. "Son," he had said, pausing to rest his hand on a weathered post, "there are two kinds of wealth in this world. The kind that buys things and the kind that sustains generations. Never confuse the two, and never let anyone take what has been entrusted to you." As darkness fell across the land we had protected together, I whispered into the gathering night, "I did not forget Dad, and neither will they."